Joining us, Professor of Economics and Public Policy at the University of Michigan, Justin Wolfers, and Vaughn Hilliard, my friend, is back with us. So, Professor Wolfers, to you first. So let's say President Trump didn't start the Iran war impacting GDP. Is there any way that we would have seen 5% or even 4% GDP at this point?
No. Heck no. And definitely not. And it's not even in the range of arguable, right? We could say it was 1.5%. Maybe it could have been 2% if something else happened. Although something else didn't happen. Someone did start a trade war. Someone did blow out the budget deficit. Someone did start a war in Iran. But it was not credible when he said it. It was nonsense at the time. He possibly even knew it, or he'd been drinking a lot. But there's no question that this claim that they would supercharge American economic growth, the best thing you can say is this is a distinctly moderate period of economic growth. I actually think that's good, given all the mischief they've gotten up to, that the US economy managed to keep on keeping on at 1.5% is fantastic. 5%, a joke.
So Lutnick's promise, as Justin says, maybe would have never materialized. But you have the president over and over again, Vaughn, saying that the economy is great, that it's booming, that it's amazing, that he's fixed the economy, that his predecessor left him. You know, that's not reality. So what exactly are you hearing from folks inside the White House or from other Republicans when it comes to how they're going to explain this to the American people?
Number one, they're putting less benchmarks down. It was not just Howard Lutnick, but Scott Bessent also was placing great expectations about what the impact of the tariff war initiated by the president would be 1 year ago. And what happens is when you lay down those benchmarks for a time period that is not the end of the administration, you are setting lofty expectations, not just for you and your own domestic policy agenda, but you're setting expectations for voters and for Americans that believe, a large part of the country believes somebody that is their commerce secretary. And so when the positive effects that you predicted, like a 5% GDP growth, do not materialize, people start to question. And that's exactly what is being reflected inside of polling data. Because, folks, it's not just gas prices, energy prices, it's utility prices, it's home prices, mortgage rates. It is the reality that folks are still paying more. And it's so many of the promises that were not just on the campaign trail, but coming from this administration. And they said the impact of their policy would result in something that is not playing out here in real time. And that's a really tough thing to spin.
Yeah, I don't know how they plan on spinning that, or if they maybe don't even plan on spinning it very much, Vaughn. But I also want to ask about whether or not the Trump administration is engaged in socialism at this point, Justin, because Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary that we're talking about, he talked a big game in January, and now his department is announcing a new incentive program with $870 million in federal funds in exchange for minority equity stakes in 7 companies. So is this another example of socialism?
Laura, a long time ago, we used to begin our Economics 1 classes by defining capitalism and socialism, and then a mixed market economy, which is what the US is. We use markets and we also use government. And then I stopped teaching that because I thought everyone understood it and we didn't need to just repeat ourselves on pointless, mindless things. And then you add on, these things are more often thrown around as slogans than as anything else. So I'm going to use a different word just because socialism, communism, all that, there's so much baggage. The debate here is about how interventionist is the government. Historically, the Republican Party was the party of small government. It didn't want the government telling you or telling businesses what to do. This, though, is the most economically interventionist government of my lifetime, and I'm 53 years old. They are involved with telling you who you can trade with and at what rates. They're literally directly buying shares in particular businesses. The president calls companies and tells them how they should set their prices. He issues statements telling telling Intel to fire its CEO, and then the very next week invites the bloke in, and the bloke accidentally leaves 10% of his company down the back of the White House couch. This is not how America traditionally did business, but more to the point, it's not how the Republican Party traditionally did business. It is, in fact, the most interventionist government of my lifetime.
Vaughn, how do they explain how interventionist they are, all these national investments that the government is making.
They compare it to the CHIPS Act and that money that was provided to chip companies for AI or for chip investment, semiconductor investment in the U.S., that effectively that there was nothing that was holding any of these companies and these corporations accountable. And this is the one way to ensure that by having the government have an official stake, that somehow that the companies are going to be more responsive to the administration and the government moving forward here. But to Justin's point, I was actually over at the hotel where the CEO of Intel was staying after his Oval Office meeting. And at the time, he was moving with his scrum of folks. And I thought real fast, what question do I even ask him? The last question I would have had on my head is, what did you offer the president of the United States? And was it a 10% share of your company? And I appreciated also on that graphic that you just had up, Laura, the $28 billion to farmers, right? If his economic policy and agenda doesn't work, what he ends up doing is finding cash and a government stake in investment as an alternative route. You can tell farmers, you can tell the agricultural industry, don't worry about those losses. Sorry, this didn't work out. We're going to subsidize and make up for your losses, right? It's also the same thing when you're making these sorts of investments in these companies here. You are suddenly taking a different ownership of the American economy in a way that may not be felt or completely understood in months' time, but has long-term consequences and impact that these types of investments in these companies, I don't think that we're even at on the cusp of beginning to understand what the impact long-term will be.
Yeah, it's all just stunning, potentially hypocritical, as the president has said over and over again, that he will not be engaged in socialism, that America's not a socialist country, and he attacks Democrats for it repeatedly. Justin Wolfers and Vaughn Hilliard, thank you.